We are All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church. I am Reverend Ron Phares. And if you value honest ritual, then come let us make it. If you find ease in trusted relationship, if you unfurl in reflective space, if you delight in beautiful sound, if you strive for earnest justice, and if you sparkle in abundant fun, and who does not, then come one and all to this care home and carnival of the soul, this service of All Souls Unitarian Universalist. This is our sacred hour, our holy place where beloved community cultivates meaning and makes of this experience a kind of magic. The eco-theologian and mythologist Sophie Strand writes that magic is an escape from this world into this world. Magic doesn't take us out of our ecosystems, she says. It roots us more deeply into them, and we are about that kind of magic here. This soulful ecosystem welcomes your magic as well as the magic of those rooted into it before, those who brought us here and those brought here, and those who were here already. The Ute, Comanche, Arapaho, Apache, Cheyenne, Kiowa, Pawnee, and Lakota. And before them, the aspen and oak and pine, the waters, the soil, the air. We are their water and soil. We breathe their breath. May our welcome heal and celebrate them as our welcome seeks to heal and celebrate each and all of you gathered here. And let us get a special welcome, in fact, to those with us remotely today. Can we turn and wave to our viewers at home? We're glad that you are with us as well. Today we have the great good fortune of welcoming Reverend Dr. Terrlynn Avery into our pulpit. Reverend TLC is a pestologist, an ordained minister, and licensed psychologist who invites people into transformation through the journey of sacred intelligence, tapping into one's internal source in order to make intelligent choices that manifest the good of humanity. We could all use that help. She helps leaders discover how their sphere of influence can change the status quo and dismantle racism. She's the author of Dismantling Racism, Healing Separation from the Inside Out, as well as Sacred Intelligence, the Essence of Sacred, Selfish, and Shared Relationships. She also hosts the Dismantle Racism radio show on Talk Radio NYC. Reverend Dr. Curry is the pastor of Martin Luther King Jr. Community Presbyterian Church in Springfield, Massachusetts. We welcome you. Thank you for being here with us today. We welcome the wisdom of the Ph.D. of TLC. And we welcome all who come to this magical, open-hearted community. Let us celebrate our coming together in song. Please rise in body or spirit.
I'm here today. What I'm supposed to talk about is a time that I went above and beyond the call of duty, what I needed to do. But I have two problems with that. The first is that I'm a very humble person. I don't like tooting my own horn. I mean, I know I'm a charming genius with the body of a god, mostly Buddha. But I really don't like to brag about myself. The second reason is a little more complicated. And to tell you about that, I'm going to tell you a little story about my grandfather. In the 1950s, he worked for Westinghouse, and he worked in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but they decided he needed to work in Raleigh, North Carolina. So they moved him there, and he discovered that the bathrooms there were segregated. And he thought that was wrong. Now, he was a white man, and it didn't really affect him, and I'm pretty sure he was in middle to upper management, probably had nicer bathrooms for himself anyway. But he felt this needed to be corrected, and so he went to the board of directors, a group of Southern white gentlemen in the 1950s, and told them they couldn't do that anymore. And he convinced them that he was right. Because of what he did, they desegregated the bathrooms. And that may seem like a small thing, but at the time, that was huge. My grandmothers, both of them, I'm losing my notes. My grandmothers, both of them, were working women during the Great Depression. My father's mother, my paternal grandmother, she worked into her 70s or early 80s as an office manager. Both of my parents have owned a small business. My brother Scott is a cardiological pediatric anesthesiologist, which is a mouthful. And it means he's gone and done a lot of school. He has gone above and beyond. My other brother Brian, I'm the oldest of three, he is a senior vice president at a real estate company. My point is, I come from a family of overachievers. So I probably go above and beyond quite regularly, and I just don't recognize it. Again, I'm a pretty humble guy. So to come up with a specific example of a time when I went above and beyond, that's hard for me to do. I'm sure I do it. Let me see what else I got in my notes. The other thing I can say about myself personally, and anybody that's ever received an email from me knows that this is one of my life's philosophies. I am here to help. It is what I do. It's a philosophy I got from a manager on a help desk many years ago, and I've tried to live by it. And I don't just try and give the minimum amount of help. I always try to go above and beyond. So I don't have a specific example today, but that's where I come from. And I feel we can all go above and beyond and contribute to the financial success of our community. We can do that now, and instructions for giving will be on the screens and in the chat. Thank you very much.
Good morning. First, I want to thank Reverend Ron for allowing me to be here to speak with you all today. I want to thank the Reverend Carlton E. Smith, who is my longtime friend. He is also the lead for the Pacific Western region of the UUA. And of course, I want to thank my friend Hillary and Mika for joining me today as well. So when I was a student at Yale, they taught us to exegete our audience. And I try very hard to do that, but being a pastor of a Presbyterian church in Springfield, Massachusetts, sometimes I speak with a little exuberance. So I'm going to ask you this morning to indulge me so that if I step outside of the box of what you're used to, just count it as me being a Presbyterian pastor who's not unlike this congregation, as a matter of fact, but personally, I speak with a little exuberance, but I will try to see if I can contain myself this morning. However, if you want me to finish within the time limit that you all are used to hearing, I might have to go a little bit more quickly. So if you see that happening, just bear with me. That's what I love hearing right there. So I want to invite you before we start, if we would do something collectively, I think it will help us as we move through. Just want to invite you to take a deep breath in and just sigh it out. And another deep breath in and just sigh it out. I start with the breath because I'm going to be talking to you about racism and dismantling racism. And usually that's a highly charged subject, even when we are interested in it. And we want to engage in the conversations. But the way we center ourselves for the conversation is to remember to breathe. because it changes the heart rate, it changes the pulse rate, and it gives you time to think about what is being said. So in my book on dismantling racism, I tell a story about going to a protest with my daughters. And on the ride to this protest, which was about 45 minutes away, I tell the girls, I say, you know, COVID is still in existence, so we're gonna stay away from the crowd. We had our mask on, but we're not gonna get too involved. But we wanna be there because we want to, you know, show our solidarity. So I get to this protest, and everybody is standing around. They're just looking. And my girls are like, Mom, go get it started. And I said, are you kidding me? I didn't start this thing. I didn't call it together. Why would I go and get it started? But they were insistent. And guess what? I went and got it started. Why did I do that? Because I don't get to opt out, and neither do you. I've been doing this work for over 25 years. I took some twists and turns along the way and thought really that God wanted me to do some work on the wounds of religion, because Lord knows there are plenty of those. But racism is something that has not ended and may not end in my lifetime. So I have to continue to fight it, and I have been called for such a time as this. And I believe if you're sitting here listening to me today, you have been called for such a time as this, and you don't get to opt out. And I think it's really important, particularly for white people, to understand that this is an ongoing challenge. It's an ongoing journey. You may have the privilege of sitting out, but I'm asking you for my sake, and for my children's sake, and for your sake and your children's sake, don't opt out. We are all one. And so I want to draw on the story of Esther from my tradition. Esther in the Bible, as I talk today, I'm going to refer to her. Why am I doing this? Because for years and years and years, we've all heard about the killings of unarmed Black men by the police and everyday citizens. So what does it take for long-term actions? We saw what happened in 2020. The protests were going on all the time, were they not? Yeah. What was happening with corporations? They were really clear about showing us the black faces of the people who were CEOs. Folks had their Black Lives Matter signs all posted everywhere. We've heard the names. If I were to ask you, you could call out some of those names. George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Terrence Crutcher, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Keith Scott, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Elijah McCain, Ahmaud Arbery, Aiden Ellison, Tyree Nichols, and it goes on and on and on. But I want you to know something. They were somebody's child, husband, aunt, uncle, nephew, brother, lover. They were people with dreams and hopes of their own. They were not just people on the news. They were folks with joys and pains and laughter and tears. They were people who loved and cared for each other. And guess what? They were all human, and they were all God's children. But it's not just the physical deaths, but the emotional and the mental demise of those who are impacted by health disparities, mass incarceration, inequities in education. It is an attempted psychological and spiritual death of hate crimes against Black and brown people. It is the story of my people, the people I shepherd. Right now, as I speak to you, we are in the process of rebuilding our church. Why? Because on December 28th, 2020, a white man drove from Maine to Connecticut to set our church on fire. Why? Because of the color of my skin. I live it every day. It is the psychological terror of repeated bomb threats on historically Black colleges and universities. It is living with the knowledge that you are a moving target when you go into a grocery store, or even when you take your garbage out to the edge of the road when you live in a predominantly white town. Yet so many folks, including church folks, including well-meaning folks, remain silent. Why? Because it's not my problem. It's too overwhelming. What can I do? I don't know what to say. I don't want to offend anybody. Ooh, I don't want anybody to think I'm a racist. There is the story from the book of Esther that I mentioned to you before. And in this story, Haman is an official to the king, and Esther is married to the king. And Haman has decided that he wants to kill all of the Jews. Young, old, children, does not matter. So Queen Esther is of Jewish heritage, but she's hidden it from the king in some way. But her uncle Mordecai sends her a message to tell her, you must intervene. And Esther did what most of us would do. Her fear kicked in. She's living in this place of privilege, and she's wondering, why should I get involved? And she says, I am going to remain silent. It's not my problem. Even though she's Jewish, it's not my problem. And this is what I love. Mordecai then says to her, he was not pleased, and he said, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from some other place. And who knows that you've been called into power for such a time as this. So we've seen what happens in this country when African Americans, Black folks, are killed by the police. We've seen many more lives destroyed and families devastated. We've seen George Floyd, whoever that was who called out, we have seen him murdered on camera. And I just want you to know that there are places in this country after people protested that are still boarded up. Make no mistake about it, it wasn't just the protesters who caused a demise in a community, who caused those communities to be boarded up. But this silence, this belief that we will not be impacted, it's a misnomer. It is what causes racism to continue. So our silence, though, particularly the silence of the privileged, has done just that. When we fail to speak, we perpetuate racism. When we stay in our place of privilege, when we stay in our place of fear, we perpetuate racism. Mordecai said to Esther, but you and your father's family will perish. It's the same thing that Martin Niemöller said. He was a prominent pastor. I know that you all have heard of him. He was outspoken during the time of the Nazi rule and the concentration camps. You've heard it, right? Where he wrote this poem that said, first they came for the socialists and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me. Make no mistake about it, they've come for all of us. They've come for you. They have come for you. The overturning of Roe versus Wade has taken us back 50 years. Now, I might add a tidbit, because you might say, what does that have to do with me? Well, anti-abortion is actually steeped in racism. Did you know that? Go back and look at your history. They started it because the white folks in the South didn't want their kids to go to school with Black folks. But they knew that people would be concerned about issues of abortion. Go back and look at it. The other ways that it is impacting us is that there was an attempt to overturn same-sex marriages. What shall we say about the ideas that the court should reconsider rulings that protect contraceptions and the ways in which laws are endangering the rights of trans and gender nonconforming children? What about limiting gun control with more rights to carry without a permit? Or what about the overturning of affirmative action, which impacts more than just Black folks? Oh, they've come for you. They've come for you in very big ways. And beloved, at least you think that this is all political. I want you to look at me, my Black body, and my womanhood. My Blackness is not political, and my womanist is not political. So they've come for all of us. And so we must not live under the false illusion that what happens to others does not impact us, because we are all one. On a basic level, think about how our inability to talk with one another about racial issues affects our relationships with one another. It actually impacts who we decide to marry. Many people want to talk about race, but they don't, because again, they fear they'll say something wrong. Many people want to have a deeper relationship with someone in another race, but they don't, because they don't know how to bridge the gap. And on a broader and much deeper level, we are all impacted when a group of people do not feel safe in this society, because ultimately, unrest happens, anger happens, and tension happens, and not just for one group, but for many. It affects the way we talk to each other, the ways in which we behave towards one another. It can yield hurt feelings at the least and deadly consequences at its worst. Think also about what happens to the police. I notice all of these signs that are around here, because this is like police, being nice to police month, right? It says, thank a cop. You all noticed it? It was the first thing I noticed when I came here. But I want you to think about the police who are trying their very best to protect and serve, to do the right thing, but who are not adequately and routinely trained to discharge weapons, let alone trained to understand implicit bias, which is our unconscious actions. As an aside, if you are only conscious about 10% of what you do, you are not aware of when you are responding to someone based on race. You're not aware of the thoughts that you already had about me before I ever stepped up here, because it is unconscious. But if police officers aren't trained, think about the implications for all of us. And think about how unfair it is to them. Think about what it must feel like to some of them who have been accused of homicide or police brutality. Even if they're found not guilty, they now have to live with their actions. And what about their families? Do we ever think about the families of those police officers? No, our silence impacts all of us. But I want you to think about the cost of racism economically, the tax dollars to respond to bomb threats, to house inmates, or even the talent market that we miss out on when we choose not to go outside of looking at our white folks to hire. Think about what we miss out on. So Esther wanted to remain silent. But Mordecai again said to her, and who knows, but you have come to royal position for such a time as this. Maybe, just maybe, I want you to think about maybe you've been called for such a time as this. We must do more than listen to the terrible stories. I can't tell you how many times when I've shared a story of something that's happened to me or someone else that people say, oh, I'm so sorry. I don't want your sorry, I want your actions. That's what we're called to do. We're required to do more than just have ears. Ears cannot substitute for the doing. People are not fed and clothed just by hearing. People are not healed by hearing. Problems are not resolved by hearing. We must act to heal the racial divide that exists in this country, that exists in Colorado Springs. What are we called to do for such a time as this? It is to take a look at our history, the good and the bad. I appreciate Andy reading about his ancestors, but we must look at history in this country to see the deep psychological, social, and emotional pain that still permeates us individually and collectively. I want you to think about enslavement, and I want you to think about Jim Crow. Enslavement was less than 160 years ago. Jim Crow was less than 60 years ago. So then think for a moment how long it takes us to heal our personal bruises. It takes 8 generations. And our kids are impacted by the stuff we've been through. So if that happens based on us personally, what do you think happens with racism? It hasn't been 8 generations. So I just want you to let that settle in for a moment. And we can acknowledge that, yes, racism and racial tension still exist in this country. And only if we acknowledge it can we really act upon it. And so often we're scared to look at our history, aren't we? We're scared of what we might see. And white folks in particular, and I know this because I've trained plenty of white folks, and this is what people will say, they deal with guilt and shame. And there's no place for guilt and shame in the healing process. And I know we can look at places like Florida and Texas, and we can shake our heads about them, right? Because we're not like them. They don't want Black history taught in school. Yet, if more white folks were to look at their own history and our history, we could see that white folks have not only been involved in the bad of racism, we can see that white folks have been very strategic in dismantling racism. Andy's grandfather was one of them. William Lewis Moore was another one. He was a postman from Baltimore. He was shot and killed during a one-man march against segregation. Viola Luiso, a housewife and mother from Detroit, drove along to Alabama to help with the Selma March after seeing televised reports of the attack at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And yes, she was killed. And I know you all are saying, I don't want to die, so I don't want to do this work. Well, there was a Bostonian named Barbara Henry who taught Ruby Bridges. Do you all know the story of Ruby Bridges? Ruby Bridges was a 6-year-old girl who integrated the schools in Louisiana. And for an entire year, Barbara Henry and Ruby Bridges were alone in that school while white folks called her everything but a child of God. It took courage for Ruby Bridges and Barbara Henry. And I believe Barbara Henry is still living, so you don't have to die. Then there was Clifford Dorr, who was the lawyer who defended Rosa Parks. And then there was Joan Mulholland. She was a freedom rider who was jailed for 2 months in the maximum security unit of the Mississippi State Penitentiary. Yes, there are sacrifices to be made. And we are called upon, like Esther was, to fast, to pray, to gather supports. And whether you pray in a traditional way or not, getting together, honing your energy together with other folks, that is what changes the world. Knowing that you are not alone in this process, that is what changes a world. And so we're called to have the conversations within this lovely place here, this sanctuary, to learn what it's like for other folks to live in this country, to live in Colorado Springs. Have you had conversations with folks who don't look like you and say, why aren't you here worshiping with us? Yes, you have a few people here who don't look like you, but have you ever wondered about having more people and wondered what their life is like? To understand truly what it means when people say Black Lives Matter. I know that you all do. But one thing you want to say when you're having conversations with your counterpart is that it's not that our lives don't matter, But we want to call attention to Black lives, just like during the month of October. It's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. All cancer matters, does it not? But breast cancer matters this month. We're called to have the conversations in our homes and with difficult family members. I know in 2020, some of you all were really frustrated with your family members, but that's why you have to know how to talk about race, so that you can get to this place where you can listen to one another and find out the thing that they are fearing, those people who think differently with you. It is important for us to join with police officers and leaders. It's the only way we can reconcile the world. We must take the time to attend one meeting, write a letter, or participate in a program to share our vast knowledge. We are called to think outside of the box. We're called to do more. Yes, I know you're doing the work. I'm doing the work, but every day I'm challenged to do more. And so ultimately, Esther's story, and this is what I love about it, she said to Mordecai, "If I perish, I perish." Justice and righteousness are rarely comfortable, and they may be risky. But there comes a time that you must say, "If I perish, I perish." And likely you will not. We must know that you die a slow death when you live in a world of sameness that is characterized by the advancement and privileges of some at the expense of others. As I say in my book on dismantling racism, in the quest to dismantle racism, beloved, I want you to know this. You are in the right place in your life. You are in the right body. You are in the right gender. You are in the right position. You're the right color. You are the right sexuality. You are in the right birth order, and so forth. You are the one that you've been waiting for to solve the issue of dismantling racism. And you were born for such a time as this. Amen.
All right, yes, you're right. Stay standing, please, for the benediction. You're wrong, these people over here. But you're new, so it's cool. You haven't been here before. You don't know that part. Welcome. All right, yes. As we leave this sacred time and place that we have gathered together, first thing I want you to know is that the book that Reverend Terrlynn has written is going to be for sale in the back. Carlton is holding it, and he could wave and say hello. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. Are there any biblical scholars in the room? Okay, so I think I learned this. In the book of Esther, there's no mention of the tetragrammaton. There's no mention of God in the book of Esther. But in Hebrew, if you start at the front and the back and count the beginning of each word of that book to the middle, the 4 words in the middle start with Y or Yod, whatever it is in Hebrew, and it spells God. So God is in the middle of this book, unmentioned throughout the book. And I think I want to tie that to what you said, because I feel like that book is a book about action that is fueled by our connection to the divine and the holy. So I want you all to feel that connection to the divine and the holy that we have conjured together, I hope, today, and use that to fuel your action. I'd also like to invite Reverend Terrlynn to give us a good word at the end.
So for our benediction, I want to modify the words of the Reverend Elaine Hyman. God bless you with the memory of the price paid for freedom. God keep you nurtured and nourished by the knowledge of who you are and whose you are. God cause a divine peace to shine upon you and be gracious to you, giving you what is needful and what is good for the living of your lives. God give you peace with an appetite for justice, a desire to be the best and not to settle for mediocrity, an intolerance of oppression, and a refusal to ever let any one of us return to captivity. God cause God's divine face to shine upon you. Amen.